What happens when a royal guest goes completely off the rails on live television, turning what should have been a simple morning show appearance into an absolute disaster? Well, you're about to find out in today's story that had viewers across America dropping their coffee cups in shock. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think about celebrity guests who can't handle basic interview questions. The Good Morning America studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show energy. Michael Strahan, the beloved host known for his warm demeanor and professional handling of even the most difficult guests, was preparing for what his producers had pitched as a straightforward interview. The guest was scheduled to discuss her recent charitable endeavors and upcoming projects, a typical feel-good segment to brighten viewers' morning routines. As the cameras rolled and the familiar Good Morning America theme music faded, Michael flashed his signature smile to the audience. Good morning, America. I'm Michael Strahan, and we have a very special guest with us today. Please welcome Meghan Markle. The applause was polite but enthusiastic as Meghan walked onto the set. She settled into the plush interview chair across from Michael, smoothing her designer dress and offering what appeared to be a practiced smile. The studio lights caught the expensive jewelry adorning her wrists and neck, and for a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Meghan, thank you so much for joining us this morning, Michael began, his voice carrying that warm, professional tone that had made him a morning television favorite. I know our viewers are excited to hear about your latest charitable work. You've been involved with several organizations recently. Meghan's posture shifted slightly, and something flickered across her expression. Well, Michael, I appreciate you having me on, though I have to say, I'm surprised by how basic that question is. I would have expected something more substantive from someone in your position. The comment hung in the air for a moment. Michael's media training kicked in immediately, his smile never wavering despite the unexpected rudeness. Of course, let's dive deeper then. Can you tell us about the specific impact you're hoping to make with your foundation work? Impact? Meghan's tone had shifted noticeably, becoming more condescending. Michael, I think you're missing the bigger picture here. The work I do isn't just about impact. It's about transformation. It's about changing the entire landscape of how we think about social responsibility. But I suppose that might be difficult for some people to grasp. The camera operators exchanged glances behind their equipment. This wasn't the friendly celebrity interview they had prepared for. Michael, however, remained the consummate professional, leaning forward slightly with genuine interest. That's fascinating, Meghan. Can you give our viewers some concrete examples of this transformation you're working toward? Meghan's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Concrete examples? Michael, you're thinking too small. You're trapped in this old-fashioned media mindset where everything has to be reduced to sound bites and simple explanations. The work I'm doing operates on a much higher level than that. I understand, Michael replied smoothly, though viewers at home could sense his patience being tested. But our audience includes people from all walks of life who might be inspired to get involved in similar work. Could you help them understand how they might contribute? That's exactly the problem, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. Everyone wants to contribute, but they don't want to do the real work of understanding the complexities involved. They want everything handed to them in neat little packages. That's not how real change happens, Michael. The producer in the control room was frantically signaling to the floor manager, sensing that the interview was spiraling away from its intended direction. Michael, reading the room perfectly, attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Let's talk about your recent trip to New York, where you visited several community centers. What was that experience like for you? Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly. You know, Michael, I find it interesting that you're focusing on the trip rather than the systemic issues those community centers are trying to address. It's this kind of surface-level journalism that prevents real progress from being made. I'm certainly interested in discussing those systemic issues, Michael responded, his professionalism intact despite the increasingly hostile tone from his guest. What would you say are the most pressing concerns you encountered? The most pressing concern, Meghan said, her voice dripping with condescension, is that people in positions like yours, with platforms like this, continue to ask the wrong questions. You have millions of viewers, Michael, and you're wasting that opportunity on superficial celebrity chit-chat. The studio audience, which had been politely attentive, was beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Some viewers at home were already reaching for their remote controls, unsure whether they were witnessing a train wreck or some kind of performance art. Michael's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained steady. I appreciate your perspective, Meghan. Our goal here is always to inform and inspire our viewers. If there are specific issues you'd like to highlight, I'm more than happy to give you that platform. Platform? Meghan's tone became increasingly sharp. Michael, this isn't about you giving me anything. This is about you doing your job properly. When was the last time you challenged your guests to think beyond their comfort zones? When was the last time you used this show to address real issues instead of promoting celebrity projects? The control room was in chaos. The producer was debating whether to cut to commercial early, while the director was trying to decide which camera angles would best capture what was rapidly becoming a disaster. Michael, however, was handling the situation with the grace and professionalism that had defined his career. "We cover a wide range of topics on Good Morning America," he said calmly. "Today, we invited you here to discuss your charitable work because our viewers are interested in learning about causes they might want to support. If you'd prefer to discuss other topics, we can certainly do that." Other topics? Meghan's voice had reached a pitch that was making the audio engineers wince. Michael, everything is connected. You can't separate charitable work from politics, from social justice, from the fundamental inequalities that plague our society. But I suppose that level of thinking might be too complex for morning television. The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several crew members looked toward Michael with concern, wondering how he would respond to such a blatant attack on his intelligence and professional capabilities. Michael took a deep breath, his hands clasped calmly in his lap. "Meghan, I think our viewers would benefit from hearing about specific ways they can get involved in causes you care about. Can we focus on actionable steps people can take?" "Actionable steps?" Meghan's laugh was bitter and dismissive. "Michael, you're still not getting it. The first actionable step is for people like you to stop dumbing down important conversations. The second step is to stop treating your audience like they're incapable of handling complex ideas." The personal attacks were becoming more frequent and more pointed. Michael's professionalism was being tested in ways that few television hosts ever experience, but he continued to maintain his composure, understanding that millions of viewers were watching to see how he would handle this increasingly hostile situation. What happened next would go down as one of the most uncomfortable moments in morning television history. Michael, still maintaining his professional demeanor despite the relentless personal attacks, decided to give his guest one more opportunity to redirect the conversation constructively. "Meghan, I can see you're passionate about these issues," he said, his voice steady but with just a hint of strain that keen observers could detect. "Perhaps you could share with our viewers what originally inspired you to get involved in charitable work." Meghan's response was immediate and cutting. "What inspired me, Michael, was seeing how people in positions of influence consistently failed to use their platforms responsibly. Present company included, apparently." The studio fell silent except for the hum of equipment. Even the cameramen, seasoned professionals who had seen countless interviews go sideways, were stunned by the brazen disrespect being displayed on live television. Michael's smile finally began to fade, replaced by a more serious expression. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean by that, Meghan." "Of course you don't understand," she replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "That's exactly the problem. You're sitting there asking me fluffy questions about community center visits when there are children going hungry, when there are families being torn apart by systemic racism, when there are women being silenced by patriarchal structures, and your response is to ask me about inspiration?" "Those are certainly important issues," Michael replied, his patience wearing visibly thin. "If you'd like to discuss any of those topics specifically, we can absolutely do that. But attacking me personally isn't going to help address any of those problems." Meghan's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like anger. "Attacking you? Michael, I'm trying to educate you. There's a difference, though I realize that distinction might be lost on someone who spent their career asking celebrities about their workout routines and favorite recipes." The personal insult about his career hit its mark. Michael had worked incredibly hard to establish himself as a serious journalist and television host, transitioning from his sports career with dedication and professionalism. The crew could see his jaw clench slightly, though his voice remained controlled. "I've been fortunate to interview world leaders, Nobel Prize winners, and people making real differences in their communities," he said quietly. "I take my responsibility to our viewers very seriously." "Do you?" Meghan's tone was mocking now. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you take your paycheck seriously. There's a difference between responsibility and just showing up to collect a salary." The control room was in complete chaos. The producer was frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial while network executives who had been alerted to the disaster unfolding on live television were making urgent phone calls. But Michael, to his credit, wasn't backing down. "Meghan, I invited you here as a guest on our show, and I've tried to give you every opportunity to share your message with our audience. But I won't sit here and let you insult me, our show, or our viewers." "Your viewers?" Meghan's laugh was sharp and contemptuous. "Michael, your viewers are part of the problem. They're content to sit in their living rooms, sipping their coffee, feeling good about themselves for watching a segment about charity work, but they're not actually doing anything meaningful to create change." The camera caught several audience members looking genuinely offended. These were real people who had taken time out of their morning to attend a taping, and now they were being insulted by someone they had come to see. Michael's protective instincts kicked in. "I think you're underestimating our audience, Meghan. The people watching this show are teachers, nurses, parents, small business owners, people who work hard every day to support their families and contribute to their communities." "Contribute?" Meghan's voice rose again. "Michael, showing up to work and paying taxes isn't contribution, it's basic functioning. Real contribution requires sacrifice, requires challenging the status quo, requires making people uncomfortable. But I suppose that's too much to ask from people who get their news from morning television." The insults were now directed not just at Michael, but at the millions of Americans watching at home. Social media was already exploding with outrage as viewers expressed their shock at what they were witnessing. Michael leaned forward slightly, his professional mask finally beginning to slip. "Meghan, I think you need to be very careful about how you characterize the people who are watching this program." "Careful?" she shot back. "Michael, careful is exactly the problem. Everyone's so worried about being careful, about not offending anyone, about maintaining the comfortable status quo. Meanwhile, real issues go unaddressed because people like you are too careful to ask the hard questions." "What hard questions would you like me to ask?" Michael's voice had an edge to it now that hadn't been there before. "How about this?" Meghan said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied smirk. "When was the last time you used your platform to challenge your viewers' preconceptions? When was the last time you made them genuinely uncomfortable with truths they didn't want to hear? When was the last time you did anything other than serve up easily digestible entertainment disguised as journalism?" The attack on his professional integrity was the final straw. Michael had endured personal insults, watched his guests attack their viewers, and maintained his composure throughout. But questioning his journalistic credentials struck at the core of who he was as a professional. "I've covered natural disasters, interviewed families dealing with tragedy, highlighted social injustices, and given a platform to people fighting for important causes," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I don't need to attack my guests or insult my audience to prove my commitment to journalism." "Don't you?" Meghan's tone was now openly hostile. "Because, from where I sit, it looks like you need to do something to prove you're more than just a pretty face reading from a teleprompter." The studio was dead silent. Even the most experienced crew members had never witnessed such blatant disrespect on a live television program. Michael's hands were clenched in his lap, and for a moment, it seemed like he might actually lose his composure. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke with quiet dignity. "Meghan, I think it's clear that this interview isn't going in a productive direction. Perhaps we should move on to our next segment." "Oh, now you want to move on?" Meghan's voice was dripping with sarcasm. "How convenient. When the conversation gets real, when someone challenges you to step up to your responsibilities, suddenly it's time to move on to something more comfortable." "This isn't about comfort," Michael replied, his voice gaining strength. "This is about respect. Respect for our viewers, respect for this platform, and basic human respect. You've been given every opportunity to share your message, but instead you've chosen to attack me personally and insult the people who watch this program." Meghan's response would become the moment that sealed her fate on the show. "Respect?" she said with a bitter laugh. "Michael, respect is earned, not given. And frankly, I haven't seen anything this morning that suggests you've earned it." The gasps from the studio audience were audible. Several crew members shook their heads in disbelief. The producer in the control room was already making the call that would end this disaster, but Michael wasn't finished defending himself and his show. The final moments of what would become television infamy were about to unfold. Michael Strahan, a man who had built his career on kindness, professionalism, and treating every guest with dignity, was about to reach his breaking point. But first, he would give his guest one final chance to redeem herself. "Meghan," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years of broadcast experience. I'm going to give you one more opportunity to explain to our viewers what you hope to accomplish by coming on our show today. Meghan's expression twisted into something resembling contempt. What I hope to accomplish, Michael, was to have an intelligent conversation with someone capable of rising above the mediocrity that passes for journalism on morning television. Clearly, I overestimated your abilities. That was it, the final insult that broke through Michael's legendary composure. His smile disappeared completely, replaced by a look of quiet determination that anyone who knew him would recognize as dangerous territory. You know what, Meghan? He said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. I've been in this business for a long time. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel laureates, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. In all that time, I've never encountered a guest who seemed more interested in tearing others down than building anything up. Meghan's eyes widened slightly, perhaps realizing for the first time that she had pushed too far. Excuse me? You heard me? Michael continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. You came on this show supposedly to talk about charitable work, about helping people, about making a positive difference in the world. Instead, you've spent the entire interview attacking me, attacking our viewers, and demonstrating exactly the kind of entitled, condescending attitude that turns people away from the causes you claim to care about. The studio was electric with tension. Crew members who had been looking uncomfortable were now watching with rapt attention as one of television's most respected hosts finally fought back against the most disrespectful guest in the show's history. Meghan's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me like that? Do you have any idea who I am? I know exactly who you are. Michael replied without hesitation. You're someone who thinks your title gives you the right to treat people poorly. You're someone who believes that being rude and condescending somehow makes you appear intelligent or important. And you're someone who has completely forgotten that respect is a two-way street. I don't have to listen to this, Meghan said, starting to remove her microphone. Actually, you do, Michael said firmly. You accepted our invitation to appear on this program. You agreed to be here. And the least you can do is show some basic courtesy to the people who welcomed you into their homes this morning. Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair rolling backward. This is ridiculous. I came here to have a serious conversation about important issues, and instead, I'm being lectured by someone who wouldn't understand real journalism if it hit him in the face. The personal attack only strengthened Michael's resolve. Real journalism, Meghan, involves listening to people, treating them with respect, and trying to understand different perspectives. It doesn't involve talking down to your host, insulting your audience, and acting like everyone around you is beneath your consideration. You don't know what you're talking about, Meghan shot back, her voice rising to a level that was making the audio engineers frantically adjust their equipment. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Michael replied, standing up to face her directly. I know what it's like to work with guests who are passionate about their causes, but still treat everyone around them with dignity. I know what it's like to have difficult conversations about important topics without resorting to personal attack. And I know what our viewers deserve, which is certainly better than what you've given them today. Meghan's composure was completely gone now. Your viewers don't deserve anything. They're sitting at home, living their small, insignificant lives, pretending that watching morning television somehow makes them informed citizens. They need to be challenged. They need to be made uncomfortable. They need to face reality. Stop, Michael said, his voice cutting through her rant like a knife. Just stop. You don't get to come on our show and attack the teachers who are shaping young minds, the healthcare workers who are saving lives, the parents who are doing their best to raise good kids, and the countless other people who make this country work every single day. The passion in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't just about defending his show anymore. It was about defending the millions of Americans who had been insulted by his guest's elitist attitude. Meghan seemed stunned by the force of his response. I never said, Yes, you did, Michael interrupted. You've spent the last 20 minutes telling me and everyone watching that we're not smart enough, not sophisticated enough, not worthy enough to engage with your important ideas. Well, here's a newsflash for you. Treating people poorly doesn't make you superior. It just makes you someone people don't want to be around. The control room was getting frantic signals from network executives, but the producer had made a decision. This was television gold, and sometimes you had to let these moments play out. Meghan was clearly rattled now, her carefully constructed public persona cracking under pressure. You have no right to speak to me this way. I am a member of the royal family, and I'm a person doing my job." Michael replied calmly, "Your title doesn't give you the right to be cruel to people. It doesn't excuse your behavior, and it certainly doesn't impress me or our viewers." "This is unacceptable," Meghan said, looking around the studio as if expecting someone to come to her rescue. "I demand to speak to your producer. I demand an apology." Michael's response was swift and final. "The only person who owes anyone an apology here is you. You owe an apology to our viewers, you owe an apology to our crew, and frankly, you owe an apology to everyone who works hard to make positive changes in the world without feeling the need to tear others down in the process." Meghan's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to anger to something approaching panic. She had clearly never been confronted so directly by someone who refused to be intimidated by her status or title. "I'm leaving," she announced, pulling off her microphone and dropping it on the chair. "That's probably for the best," Michael said calmly. "Security will escort you out." As if on cue, two security guards appeared at the edge of the set. They weren't aggressive or dramatic, just professional men doing their job, but their presence made it clear that Meghan's time on Good Morning America was officially over. "This isn't over," she said, pointing at Michael as she was led away. "Yes, it is," he replied quietly, watching as she was escorted off the set and presumably out of the building. Michael turned back to face the cameras, straightened his tie, and took a deep breath. When he spoke again, his voice carried all the warmth and professionalism that had made him beloved by millions of viewers. "Well, folks, that certainly wasn't what we had planned for this morning," he said with a slight smile that didn't quite hide the strain of the last half hour. "We'll be right back after this commercial break with a cooking segment that I promise will be much more pleasant for everyone involved." As the cameras cut away and the studio lights dimmed for the commercial break, the crew erupted in spontaneous applause. Michael had defended not just himself and his show, but every hardworking American who had been insulted by his guests' arrogant behavior. The aftermath would dominate social media for weeks, with overwhelming support for Michael's handling of the situation and universal condemnation of his guests' behavior. It would become a masterclass in how to maintain dignity under pressure while still standing up for what's right. So there you have it, the complete breakdown of one of the most shocking moments in morning television history. What do you think? Did Michael handle this situation correctly, or should he have ended the interview sooner? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.